Today I want to talk about something very, I guess, specific in particular that I see nowadays. And I think it's regret. I think regret is something that is very useful to some people. It can be something that can prevent you from making the same mistake over and over again. But more and more what I see these days is it hinders you more than helps you when you're trying to move on from certain scenarios. So for example, you may have made a mistake. If you're human, I'm human. I've made so many mistakes in my life. But once you make that mistake with the information you had at the time and the situation you were in at the time, it's not like I'm saying never think about it ever again, never remember the lesson that you should have learned from it. But there's this tendency to kind of, especially when you're a guy, I think. When you're a guy, when you make a really bad mistake and it hurts, I've seen this tendency to brush past it like it didn't mean anything, and then but at the same time kind of hold on to it deep down. And I understand that there is a very like, with the culture of everyone being like, get the hell over it or whatever, it's a very easy thing to do. But the reality is, if you don't reflect on it at least for a bit and then try to take the lesson from it, it will haunt you and keep you kind of stuck in that moment. I think at least to some degree stuck in that moment, and maybe it won't affect you like completely. For me, I think that I've made particular mistakes that it's not that they held me back completely. I still had gotten things done that I wanted to get done, but I think they prevented some growth. I really think that if I had not held on to certain things for a certain amount of time, I could have done more. And I don't think that's an uncommon thing from what I'm hearing from people in their mid-20s, early 30s. It's that kind of not being able to let go of a mistake you made, whether it's maybe you wasted some time when you were in your late teens or early 20s and now you're 26 and you're like, wow, I really wasted so much time. And then you spend like a year or two thinking about how much time you wasted and how, oh, if I go back to school or if I start over again, like I'll be 26. And by the time you're like, okay, I have to do it, you're 28. And not that it's too late or anything like that. It's just like, if you let that fear of that almost like, I guess, analysis paralysis kind of thing take over, you can always find a reason not to do anything. You can always find a reason to kind of beat yourself up over something from the past. We all have a past. I feel like judging someone based off one thing they did it's a very dangerous thing to do, in my opinion. I mean, I found myself doing the same thing. It's very easy to be judgmental. And this is why I'm saying this, because it's so easy to be very like, oh, well, that person's just like this. They were like this when I knew them at this time, and they're going to be like that forever. I don't think that's the case. And also, that's not really fair to like a lot of people who I've seen people change their ways and, stop doing certain things. But it's very hard to kind of let that go. And I think it's a little easier to kind of not judge other people, but we're not as nice to ourselves. We're like, well, I've always been like this. I'm always going to mess this up. I've never been good at this. I've heard a lot of people say, even friends of mine, I've heard say like, well, I've just never been smart like that. And I've at least when in those particular cases, I never believed that. I never believed that some of my friends weren't intelligent enough to do certain things. I think that intelligence comes in all different forms, and you can find your ways to your different methods of kind of using what you have. But I've seen men say, well, I can't do that. I'm just lazy, or I'm not creative, or whatever it may be. And it's like, you're basing that off other experiences you've had in the past. Let's say when you were a kid and you did bad in school or whatever, but that's not you. You don't always have to be that guy. And maybe you regret it. Maybe you were a lazy, undisciplined, uncreative person in high school or early college. Maybe you were that, but it doesn't mean that you always have to be that. If you were an alcoholic, it doesn't mean you always have to be like that. I'm not saying that forgive yourself completely and never let anything like that happen again. I'm just saying from what I see and from my own personal experience, really beating yourself up over mistakes you've made in the past, I think it can do a number of things. The first thing it can do is hold you back from potentially growing. If you did what you thought was right at the time and you were working on the information you did and you make a mistake, hey, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone does. No matter who it is, your parents, your boss, everyone's made a mistake where they're like, oh my God, that was so stupid. I really hope no one ever finds out about that, And sometimes the mistakes seem unfair. Sometimes you're like, someone says they're going to be there for you, and then they're not there for you, or you say you're going to be there for someone, and because of your own weakness or situations in life, you're not there for the person you want to be there for. And it can happen in all manner of ways. It can be a very unfair thing. It can be a fair thing. Um, for me particularly, I've had instances of my life where things I don't think they were that fair, but you kind of work through them, and you try to be the best you can be at the time. I've had family illnesses come up in my life where, like, health issues with either myself or people in my family, and at the time it really seemed like, oh, this couldn't have come at a worse time. But if I'm being honest, if I'm being completely candid, I think that in a lot of the situations, not everything, because I'm not going to claim I've handled everything perfectly, but in a lot of the situations where things have kind of hit the fan, health wise and stuff like that, I'm really happy with the way I handled things. I'm really happy that, like, I took some hits, don't get me wrong, but I like that I did what I thought was right at the time. And even though I made some mistakes along the way, I'm not angry at myself anymore on how I may have mismanaged certain things at the time. I don't know if that makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, the mistakes you made at the time is a different version of you now. You don't have to be that person, even if it's the most, like, messed up thing, like, not a crime or anything. I'm just saying, but you know what I mean. Like, maybe you talked a lot of stuff about, like, you were a gossiper or something like that, and you ruined a few friendships, or you were unfaithful, or you literally blew a chance that you had to do a lot of good. Let's say you had all the privilege in the world to go study at college, and you just blew off 4 years of your life, and next thing you know, and you're 24, 25, and you're like, I don't know what to do. And maybe people, because of that, you've developed a real like a kind of perception in your family as, like, oh, you're a loser or something like that. You can feel that. I've talked to people that have some inkling of that they think that, oh, well, like, I've wasted so much time, and, like, this is just how I am, like, I don't know what to do, like, even if I try, like, I probably won't happen. Like, you can't beat yourself up from these things from the past. I really want to urge you to just take a second and try to live that, like, take the lesson from it. But then, other than that, beating yourself up over it, I think it's just redundant. I can give you a number of different examples. For me particularly, I always loved, like, not always, but for me particularly, I've run marathons since I was like 20 or something like that. And then there was this one year that I ran a marathon on my birthday. I ran it. I think I was turning 22 at the time. So whatever, it doesn't matter. And I didn't finish. I had terrible sleep because of drama. And I twisted my ankle, and it was raining, and I gave up 22 miles in. And I had my parents drive out an hour to come see the race, and I didn't finish. And the person that came with me won the race. It was literally like, this is actually really embarrassing, I had to get an ambulance to drive me from the place where I tapped out to the finish line. Super embarrassing. One of the worst days of my life. On my birthday, too. And I was like, I handled it terribly. I'll be completely candid. I was bitter. I was jealous. I was upset at myself. No one was more, like, disappointed in the day than me. And at the time, I feel like I took it out on people that I had no reason to take it out on. It was a weak thing to do. It was very immature for me to do that. And it was honestly based off all my own insecurities. But I made a vow that, like, it wouldn't, like, that won't happen again with that specific race. So they ran the same race the next year, and I was like, I'm gonna come back. I was like, I will die but I'm gonna finish this race. Something's like, I was so angry at how I acted, because it wasn't just the race that I messed up on, in my opinion. It was how I acted after I faced some adversity and I lost. You should be gracious. You should be thankful that I should have been more thankful that I even have parents that would come out and support me like that, especially after all the crap I've pulled. I should have been grateful, but I wasn't. I was bitter. I was angry. I was like, God damn it. I'm so mad right now. But anyway, fast forward a year. It actually was worse conditions the year. It rained the entire time. And I don't know if you guys have ever run a marathon or whatever like that, but it's 26 miles and it was like 3,000 feet of elevation this particular race. And, like, I felt like crap the entire time. This was one of the worst races I've ever run. And I've done 6 so far, but this was by far the worst one. And I'm running this race and I'm really reflecting on how I acted. During the second race is where I realized how much of a bitch I acted like the year before. That's when I realized it. I was like, God damn, I was like, I was mean to this person and then that person and then I took it out on this, and all because I lost. But the only reason I was thinking about that stuff is to take the lesson from it. I did take the lesson. I not only did I finish the race, but I remember my mother at the time was making a birthday kind of lunch for me. And I got her flowers and I was really thankful. Like, I was actually thankful. I got my mother flowers and I got someone I was seeing at the time flowers that day too. And it wasn't even about like the race anymore. I mean, I won the race, it was fine, but after that I was like, no, I need to be like, I guess, a better man. I'm not going to say like a good man. I don't know if who can judge that, but like God or something, but I didn't want to act like the year before. I really didn't. I had so much regret and I had felt like such a piece of shit for acting like that. But after that day, after the second race, I didn't feel like that anymore. I let it go completely. Only now, because I'm kind of embarrassed to tell the story, do I think it's like relevant to revisit those feelings of kind of shame that I had on that day. Do I think that it's like, I guess, useful to talk about? But if it wasn't for something like this, or maybe talking to someone about regret, then I wouldn't really think about it too much. The time of the first race, I did my best that day. I did my best. I mentally gave up, but at the time I thought I was doing my best. You know, what do I gain from beating up 22-year-old me that acted like a dickhead that day? Like, what do I don't gain anything from that. You know, I was young. I'm still young, but like, I was a dumbass. I'm gonna say I was a dumbass, but I'm not gonna sit here and act like beating myself up for that is gonna fix anything. It's not gonna change anything, and I think that that's probably something that I see most people need to hear a lot these days. You can regret the past as much as you want, but it's not gonna change anything. And sometimes I know it sounds so simple and it sounds like, oh, like Captain Obvious here, but the reality is when you're overthinking stuff and you're constantly thinking about something you did, maybe it was wrong or maybe you missed an opportunity, whatever it is, you're wasting time. As long as you get the lesson that you needed to get from it, whether it's trusting somebody or just wasting time in general, whatever it may be, then you've done the work that you need to do. The content shared in this video represents personal opinions and humors and is not meant to be taken as professional advice or guidance. This channel and its creators are not affiliated with any professional or educational institution. Viewer discretion is advised, and any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental.